Don't forget, Friday, we have a special live show. We haven't done a live show since the Montreal Canadiens got ousted by the Washington Capitals in round one and game five of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Congratulations to the Florida Panthers, who repeat and run it back. You're defending Stanley Cup champs, building themselves a little bit of a salary cap era dynasty. You know, the Montreal Canadiens, once upon a time, were trying to be like Florida and build a salary cap era dynasty. They thought they had their goaltender that could guide them to a Stanley Cup, and then Chris Kreider crashed into Carey Price, and the rest, as they say, is history. Can we talk about, is this the beginning of the end of Carey Price in terms of moving his contract? Is this something that the Canadiens are aggressively trying to tackle, not considering approaching this summer? What's the strategy behind Carey Price's contract coming to an end, LTIR, cap space, and all of those things? How big of an issue is this currently?
Well, the thing is that, I see a lot of trade proposals for the Montreal Canadiens bringing in guys and, high-priced players and whatnot. The Montreal Canadiens only have about $6 million in cap space right now.
Yeah.
And people are going to be like, oh, you could just put Price on LTIR. Okay. Well, we did a video on this, so I won't go into more detail. But when you have Ivan Demidov, Lane Hudson, David Reinbacher, Oliver Kapanen, all potentially in your lineup, and that's not to say that the Canadiens may not could make a trade for a player that could jump into their lineup and be still on their entry-level contract with performance bonuses. But all those performance bonuses, they go to next year if the Canadiens are on LTIR. So if Ivan Demidov wins the Calder, he's probably getting $2 to $2.5 million in performance bonuses. Well, that impacts the 2026-2027 cap hit. Right. So even though Price's money comes off Price contract comes off the books next summer this time, problem is that the penalties are still going to be felt. And the Canadiens feel like there is a potential market for them to be able to unload Price's contract because, yes, the salary cap is going up, but not every team is going to be able to spend top dollar on players because there's going to be a market for them and they're going to tend to want to go to contending teams.
Okay.
So it's a question of being able to figure that out. So if you look at, for example, you look at a team like the Chicago Blackhawks. The Chicago Blackhawks traded a lot of salary away at the trade deadline and therefore had to gain salary just to hit the salary cap floor, which is the reason and the premise of this entire video. It's teams needing to reach the salary cap floor.
Gotcha. And
so what the Chicago Blackhawks did is they traded for Shea Weber's contract out of Utah, because it's insured and it's $7 million in cap hit, but $1 million in salary, which is primarily covered by insurance. The same applies to Carey Price in this case, but not because of the salary difference, but because his bonus and salary are also covered by insurance. So the team that would be acquiring him strictly to meet the salary cap floor on paper. And I think that's the thing that fans need to keep in mind as we say this. Why would the Canadiens move Carey Price's contract? Because LTIR is not free money. LTIR is money with conditions. And those conditions can impede them from being successful this season, and it could be a problem for them next season. The only time LTIR is really good is when you're a contending team and you want to add players. And the player that's on LTIR is out for the rest of the season, like the Florida Panthers did with Matthew Tkachuk, like the Vegas Golden Knights did with a guy like Mark Stone. The Canadiens, being a rebuilding team with a bunch of young players, actually has the opposite effect. So when you look at teams right now, there are a lot of teams that are already close to the cap. You look at the Colorado Avalanche, you look at the Dallas Stars, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the St. Louis Blues, all close to the cap. The Blues then would probably put Torrey Krug on LTIR, and they would get some space to maneuver. But them too, they're going to have some young players, so that may be problematic. Now, if you go to the other side and you look at teams that have money to spend, the Columbus Blue Jackets have $55 million to spend and already have 18 players signed. The San Jose Sharks have $53 million to spend. They have $53 million on their caps. Those numbers are inverted. So they have $41 million to spend through the Sharks, $40 million the Blue Jackets, $32 million the Ducks, though that money will be spent. And then you potentially also have the Calgary Flames with $26 million to spend. There are two teams that aren't up to aren't over the salary cap floor right now. The Columbus Blue Jackets, the San Jose Sharks. To me, the San Jose Sharks are the perfect target team to take on Carey Price's contract. And then the reason being is I don't think the San Jose Sharks are going to be a top free agent player. So they're going to need to reach the salary cap floor somehow. And taking on $10 million of no cost money makes a ton of sense in being able to do that, because you don't have to take on a bad contract for many years just to hit the floor. You get
So
it
what
for
does a
1
deal
year.
like that? What does a deal look like then? Between a hypothetical deal between San Jose and Montreal, like the way you lay it out, sounds like who's getting the bigger favor here? San Jose's getting the bigger favor, right? In this hypothetical, if Carey Price lands, or his contract lands with the San Jose Sharks, and Price stays in his villa in Kelowna, but San Jose gets the big benefit here because they get to the floor and the Canadians get out from underneath.
Well, I'll give you an example. The Shea Weber trade that I told you about.
Yeah,
It was Shea Weber's contract, the rights to Victor Soderstrom, and forward prospect Aku Rati, not to be confused with his brother that's in Vancouver, in exchange for a 5th-round pick from Chicago. So basically, the dump of Shea Weber's contract, the rights to Victor Soderstrom, which Chicago then traded to Boston, and a prospect. So basically middling assets, the equivalent of about a 3rd and a 4th-round pick at most, in exchange for a 5th-round pick. So it's a wash, basically, right? So if the Canadians have 3 3rd-round picks, a bunch of 4th-round picks.
Yeah.
Like
they're good.
They're fine, right? So if it costs them a 4th-round pick to unload Carey Price's contract, I don't think anybody's going to cry about it. Only if they need to spend that money. And this is the caveat. I don't see the Montreal Canadiens trading that contract unless they need the money.
Right.
Because if they don't need the money, you have $6 million in cap space. You have what? 2 restricted free agents really to sign.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens with Caden Primo. I'm not sure that they qualify that contract, but it's Emil Heineman and Jaden Struble that you have to sign, and that's basically it. That are going to make
it happening?
the NHL.
You see it happening this summer? Do you think this is one of the moves that Ken Hughes makes?
Only see it happen if the Canadians bring in a roster player of mid to high level salary. So if the Canadians magically trade for a 2C,
yeah,
then they're probably going to look to move Carey Price's contract. If the Canadians feel like they add a piece on defense, right? If they add a high-priced top 4 right shot defenseman like an Anderson or a Dobson, they may look to move Carey Price's contract. If they just stand pat and go to free agency and try to go and look at some value signings, they still may have to trade Carey Price's contract, because if you go and sign like a Tanner Jeannot, for example, that may cost you $2 million, right? And then you got to factor in the $2 to $3 million it may cost to retain both Emil Heineman and Jaden Struble. So then, are you really going to go into next season with $1 million in cap space?
Yeah.
That may be problematic. What happens if you run into injuries? Then you're going to be on LTIR, and that could be problematic as well. So it puts them in a very vulnerable situation that you don't want to be in, especially if you're trying to make the playoffs. When they were a rebuilding team, who cares? No. Who cares? Use LTIR, use the maximum of your money. But when the moment you start trying to be competitive, but you're not that elite level competitive, then it can start being a problem, because then it can affect you this season and next season.
Well, let me tell you, I've loved hockey ever since I can remember my first memory. I've loved the game of hockey, and my favorite position in the game, it was and remains the goaltending position. I've always loved goalies. And when we talk about the ending of Carey Price's potential time with Montreal contractually, now obviously he's retired as a player. I go through a certain set of emotions, I thought he was a great teammate. I thought he was a good human being. I think he understood what it meant to be the number 1 goaltender for the most storied franchise in hockey. And there's part of me that's, damn, what goes through my head when I talk about the end of Carey Price's contract and it potentially being moved in these kind of paper moves, right? Is, man, what could have been. I have no problem when Bergevin gave him the contract. I argued this on the radio at the time, and I will today. with whomever decides to engage with me. He was the Canadians' version of Connor McDavid. They had to keep him, in my opinion. That guy gets paid. If they win the Stanley Cup, nobody gives a bleep about the rest of the contract. That obviously didn't happen. So that's why I have that, man, what could have been for the
And
great number
still,
31. What goes through your mind? I ask you to check your credentials at the door for a second. Talk to me like a human being. Talk to me about, you know, what goes through your mind when we spell the end of Carey Price's contract with the Canadiens?
I don't like, to me, it's paper, right? Like, to me, the end of Carey Price with the Montreal Canadiens was that win against the Florida Panthers at the end of the 2021-2022 season. And I think he knew it too, because they were popping champagne in that locker room, so much so that they moved the media availabilities to the next day.
Right.
So I think everyone knew it. It was celebrated by the team, celebrated by the players, it was celebrated by the media that was there. So, to me, again, full worthy of the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Weber's going in, he's going in. Those two guys deserved it. But, same reason with Weber, right? Like, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are going to be like, you should keep Price because of the legacy. No. Legacy, like, he got his money. He's been around the team. Just because his contract's traded doesn't mean he can't show up to games like he does and be around the team. It's just paper. It's just money that he's still being paid out. And to me, at the end of the day, like, that's a Hall of Famer. And in like no debate whatsoever, just one of the best goalies of his generation. And so to me, it speaks to the end of an era to me that was disappointing, the same way that Connor McDavid currently feels disappointed for a goalie that just was not properly surrounded and was taken for granted by the management team that had him there. And that's the reason why they had to give him a $10.5 million contract. It's because they couldn't actually get a number one center to put in front of him, because they couldn't actually get a deep enough lineup that would be worthy of him, where the team wouldn't fall apart the moment he went down. And I think that's the emotion I see when I see Carey Price. You talk about he was this team's Connor McDavid. He's going through it with Connor McDavid. The only difference is that he didn't have a running man like Leon Draisaitl to be like that 1-2. You could argue that maybe it was PK Subban or Shea Weber.
Markov, I guess.
Even then, PK Subban, Shea Weber were like at the top of their craft. Markov was probably the most underrated defenseman of his generation.
Markov is the best defenseman that has worn a Canadiens uniform in my life. End of sentence.
When were you born?
1978.
Okay, that makes maybe. When did Big Bird retire?
Dude, one of my memories of 19, and I remember, I'll never forget. I'm so happy you brought him up. I'll never, watching Canadiens games with my father before I was 10 years old and everything. And Larry Robinson went to change on the fly, and he went to hop over the boards, and his weight didn't carry him over. So he fell back. He fell on his ass on the ice again. And I started laughing. And my father looked at me, he goes, "You have no idea how great this man was in his prime." Obviously, part of the big three was Serge Savard and the great Guy Lapointe. But same thing with Guy Lafleur. I watched Guy Lafleur as a Nordique. I watched Guy Lafleur as a New York Ranger. I remember watching him without a helmet on. But as a 78 birthday boy who can kind of remember 86 a little bit, I've never seen a better defenseman than 79. No.
So you see, like, I like that you bring up like Lafleur. Like when he left, it was like a ding on his legacy with the Canadiens at the time.
Oh, yeah.
But you see, like with Carey Price in this situation, it's not the same thing
at all. No.
And I want to really juxtapose the two. Trading away a retired player's contract, like for all intents and purposes, if the CBA wasn't the way it was and he was ruled unable to play in the former CBAs, he would just cease to play and his contract would be voided and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Right. And the Canadiens are probably in a far better place contractually.
Of course, that's undisputable, right? Yeah, for sure.
So to me, it's not like it's the end of the era happened a long time ago. And this is just the symbolic end of it. And that's exactly what fans need to see this as, is symbolic.
That's
but
true.
At the end of the day, the Phoenix rises from the ashes, right? Like you'd be getting rid of his contract to make way for something better.
Yep.
Right. Because you don't want to be the team that misses the playoffs because their general manager didn't want to risk
No.
using LTIR and being
No.
screwed next summer.
No.
But then didn't go and acquire the player that they needed to make the playoffs. So like that's the mindset I see there. And that's why I look at the San Jose Sharks, because if you look at the San Jose Sharks roster, it's not even the money that they need to spend this year.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at their defense, everyone's a free agent next year. Everyone. Everyone. You look all the way down. Unrestricted free agent, unrestricted free agent, unrestricted free agent,
Wow.
unrestricted free agent, restricted
Like the
free
Bob
agent.
Gainey Canadiens. What do you have, 12 of them that year or whatever it was? 11 or 12 of them?
When?
Bob Gainey was when Bob
Oh,
Gainey
yeah,
was
yeah.
general
08.
manager with the
08,
Saku. He went
09.
into an offseason with like 11 or 12 unrestricted free
Yeah,
agents.
08, 09. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And then he signed like 7 of them. Yeah, I remember that. There was like what? Scott Gomez was acquired via trade. Camilleri,
Right.
Gianna,
Yeah.
Mara.
Oh, Paul Mara.
That was ridiculous. Anyway, so all that to say, you know, like you look at San Jose, it's not even a question of just making the salary cap floor now. And I'm even at forward, Carl Grunstrom, Alexander Wenberg could be a very interesting player to look for. Klim Kostin, same concept, right? These are all guys. Ty Dellandrea is going to be a free agent as well, like a restricted free agent next summer as well. They've got 10 guys that are going to be unrestricted free agents next year that they may or may not sign. And they're bringing in prospects. You know, they're going to funnel in prospects to replace them. So you got to also think to their trade deadline, because unless San Jose adds a big time player, they're probably still going to miss the playoffs next year, which makes them firmly sellers, which means they're probably going to trade a lot of these guys. Okay, but that salary comes off the books. If you're not getting salary back, you're screwed. Unless you get an insurance policy by the name of Carey Price. And that's why I think that there's a lot of sense to be made here. We're acquiring Carey Price's contract now or in September if they don't want to bother with the signing bonus. Makes a whole lot of sense. Other thing to consider. The Canadiens can go over the cap by 10% in the summer without using LTIR. Something to consider, right? So if the cap is going to be 95 mil this year, they can go up 9.5 million. So they can actually spend closer to 104.5 million this summer, and then make sense of it prior to day one of the NHL season, where you need to be cap compliant, or you have to use what they call off-season LTR, which means they would have to put Price on LTR to begin with, and they wouldn't gain the benefits the team would get when they put that player on LTIR during the season. All of this is funky math, very funky math. But here are the bullet points. I think San Jose is the team that needs to add the most amount of salary just to reach the cap floor and to be in a position to sell at all at next season's trade deadline. And I think they know that they're going to be firmly in the Gavin McKenna run, even if Macklin Celebrini and Will Smith and Sam Dickinson are going to be the top young players in the league. They're still not there, and they got rid of a lot and they haven't replaced a lot. So if they're going to cover their bases, a guy like Carey Price is the premier contract that they can get, because it's one season, one and done, and you're good to go. The next season, you're signing these young guys to big, big contracts. You can bring in an extra vet, and you'll see where things go. For the Montreal Canadiens perspective, this allows them to be aggressive on the trade market for teams that are still chasing free agents that maybe want a salary dump. And I think that's where things become interesting. Or if there's a free agent, that a bigger name free agent that was still on the market that teams are all capped out and can't afford, and the Canadiens can come in and just be like, hey, we can give you a contract, and they sign a cheaper, shorter term contract with that player, and that player kind of helps them in the short term as a stopgap. That's where the logic comes in.
I love it. That's Marco D'Amico. Follow him at MN D'Amico. Read all his latest with RG Media. Marco, thanks as always, man. Outstanding work. Have a safe trip to Los Angeles, and we'll see you here live for a very special live Friday show, live from the draft. We'll have it for you beginning at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll see you live right here on this channel with Marco D'Amico and yours truly. Marco, thanks again.
Always a pleasure, guys. Enjoy the week.